And that brings me to what probably I'd like to talk about a little bit now, is what I'd call pseudo-spirituality. Do you mind if I talk about it for a bit? Because I feel it is a big issue for you guys here in England, actually, where there is the claim of spirituality without the substance. Now, can I clarify what I believe is the substance of spirituality? The primary substance of spirituality is love. What I mean by that is this. Anything that causes us to develop further in love, in the way in which we love our neighbour, our fellow man, ourselves, our children, and of course our relationship with God, our love of God, anything that causes that to develop and grow, I would actually call spirituality with substance. Anything that causes that to be ignored or stepped over or overlooked or skipped around, I would call pseudo-spirituality with no substance. Does that make sense? I feel the true substance of spirituality, and true development of the soul has to involve love. And if it does not involve love, then it cannot be true spirituality. It's just a fake, a facade. The next thing I feel which is the substance of spirituality, true spirituality, is truth. The ability to speak it and live in it. What I see a lot happening around the world, and see a lot with New Age movements, but also with other movements, such as all forms of mainstream religion, is that we have this idea of spirituality without there being much truth or love involved. There is a willingness to avoid issues of personal truth or universal truth in most forms of so-called spirituality. So instead of most forms of spirituality causing us to grow in truth, where we actually have the substance of understanding complete absolute truth, what I see happening over and over in the world is people investigate this one, that one, this one, that one, all these different forms of spirituality, and they just become more confused than they were before. To me, that is what is the result of pseudo-spirituality. Because true spirituality should result in you becoming less confused, not more confused. It should result in you knowing and understanding the universe more, not less. And I feel that a lot of the forms of spirituality, because they often are confusing to actually listen to, they are often quite illogical in their presentation, that we're forced by many forms of spirituality to try to accept illogical premises or illogical statements and illogical ideas. I feel you can almost look at any form of religion and pick out some of those cases where that particular thing seems illogical, out of harmony with just the intellect's ability to determine what is logical and what is not, but also out of harmony with love and truth in many cases. So I feel that any form of spirituality that says, all of us have truth, or we all can have different types of truth and it's all truth, or any of those kind of statements, they are all pseudo-spirituality, I feel. Because the true spirituality, which draws us to God, will result in us all having a very, very similar concept of God. So if we're actually being drawn to God by God, we'll all end up with a very, very similar concept of God. Not because we were taught it, not because we were brainwashed into it, but because it is our own experience that is very similar. Does that make sense? If God is a unique entity with unique characteristics and attributes, then it would make sense that eventually we're all going to discover the same attributes or similar attributes in God. Would that not make sense? It's a bit like if all of you want to get to know me, Sooner or later, you'll all have a very similar opinion of me if you know me well. You'll all understand my nature and my character. Now, you may have a different experience of me, but after a while, if you really get to know me closely and you really start to understand me and you spend a lot of time with me and you understand, through day-to-day interactions with me, and if I'm being truthful and open and honest with you in all of my interactions, sooner or later all of you are going to get the same opinion of me sooner or later. And it's exactly the same with all forms of development towards God. Sooner or later we'll arrive at the same conclusion about God and God's attributes and nature and characteristics the longer we spend time doing it. Any form of spirituality says differently is really, to me, a pseudo-spirituality. This idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth, to me, is a pseudo-spiritual idea. Because it doesn't make sense for a start. God, the creator of the universe, must know all truth. And if God, the creator of the universe, knows all truth, then as I grow in truth, surely I should come to know more and more of God's truth, and so therefore come to know more and more of the absolute truth that exists in the universe. To me, that is what makes sense, logically. The other part of pseudo-spirituality that I'd like to talk to you about, and this I'm just giving you an introduction here, is this aspect of humility. Most forms of spirituality at some point promote a lack of equality, hierarchy, or arrogance and self-reliance. So let's look at hierarchy as an example. A lot of forms of spirituality on the planet promote hierarchy. You see it in Eastern religion, you see this idea that there's a guru that you have to connect to, and he or she will share with you truth, and you've got to be taught by that person, and that person will lead you through a process almost like a mediator for your growth. Now, to me, that doesn't make sense. Because if God created all of us equal, then all of us have the same capacity to connect to God directly. We do not need another individual. You do not need Jesus to connect to God. You only need these basic principles to connect to God. The basic things that God has created to connect to God. It's the same with regard to, if you choose a different religion like the Christian religion, for example. There is this belief that you need a certain belief to connect to God. Now, that doesn't make much sense either if you think about it, because there are many people in other religions who actually do have a connection to God, and yet they don't have that same belief. So that surely is proof that your belief system, your intellectual belief system, has little to do, particularly initially, with any connection with God. It has to do with something else, your passion for God. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but in all forms of religious and New Age investigation, you often come across a person who has a passion for God, for the entity God. And you can feel that passion in them, can't you? Like, you just feel it as a part of their vibrancy. And quite often, if you meet a person in a different religion, that you notice the same kind of vibrancy and passion for God, and they do seem to have very similar belief systems, even though they're of different religious persuasions about God. They have similar belief systems. And the reason why is because the closer they get to God, of course, they're going to end up with very similar belief systems about God. Now, if spirituality does not involve the development of love, does not involve a person becoming more truthful in their day-to-day life, and does not involve becoming more humble, in other words, learning to be completely open with the world around you and completely transparent with the world around you, then my feelings are that that is pseudo-spirituality. It's the spirituality you have when you're not having when you're having the spirituality. Do you have a Clayton's drink here? See, in Australia, we have a drink called Clayton's. It's a drink that tastes like alcohol with no alcohol in it. And I feel, to a large degree, that's what much spirituality is. Spirituality without real substance, without the real substance that will cause any change or growth. Not that I'm saying that alcohol will cause change or growth.